Director of the International Relations Department of the AFL-CIO in Washington, D.C., Brother Brown.
Thank you. I must apologize to the people whose ears I have been buffeting with my bad voice all afternoon. The rest of you think I won't be here tomorrow. I should like to take just a few minutes to talk about two areas of the world which are of current and vital interest to all of us. One is the Hungarian area, and two is the Near East. In Hungary, the free nations of the world achieved a victory greater than we've known since the end of World War II. What had happened was that under Stalin, the captive nations, the colonies really, of Russia had been drained of so much of production, not only food, machinery, and guns, but literally the lives of their people were being drained by the high norms of production being demanded of the Poles, the Hungarians, and the Czechs. This situation had got so dangerous that with the fortunate death of Stalin, the leaders in Moscow found an opportunity to change their policy without changing their purpose. And how did they change their policy? They called together a meeting of their political party, to which all Russians are not eligible of becoming members. Only selected Russians may be members of the Communist Party in Russia. And they called together the top echelon and said, we've got to change our policy. Let's call the 20th Party Congress. And in February of 1956, just 13 months ago, the world was shocked by the secret reports which the free countries were able to obtain, what went on in the secret meeting of the 20th Party Congress. And what went on was simply that everything that had been done wrong by the Russian political party was dumped on the shoulders of the dead Stalin. He couldn't answer back. And then simultaneously they adopted the new policy of the big smile technique, of appeasement, of friendliness. And they presented to the world an idea that everything was going to be all right now. Unfortunately, this policy of peace and appeasement came to the Hungarians at exactly the right minute. They were unhappy and they didn't want to be appeased. They wanted to be allowed to work and to keep some of the food and the materials which they needed in their daily lives. The philosophical or the political argument that had developed at the 20th Party Congress was whether or not the old method represented by Stalin should be allowed to continue, or whether the new method of the smiling technique should be adopted. In Budapest, this political or philosophical discussion took place among students. And the students decided that they wanted to go a little bit farther in the peace and appeasement program. And as students in foreign countries, they banded together and they marched on what would be our city hall. At which point, one of the officials in charge, who hadn't quite got used to the idea of freedom and peace by the Russian style, he turned to the usual method of handling marching people, and he ordered that they be shot. Well, the subsequent massacre of those students was like putting an atom bomb to work. And within hours, literally, workers and other people and the students were were involved in a war that we call the Hungarian Revolution. Within 5 days, the existing representatives of the Russian government in Hungary alleged that they were leaving Hungary. They were turning the government over to the people, to communists, but nevertheless to Hungarian communists. And certainly the movies would show you, if you could see them, the tanks and the marching Russians leaving Budapest. And there was great joy and jubilation. At last they were going to have a little bit of this new big smile technique, a little more freedom to run their affairs, even as communists. But then when the Russians got outside of the city, they turned around, marched back, and you know what happened. They just massacred everybody in sight and took over again, installed a new government, and today the UN has on its hands a new Hungarian government. Now this action by the Russian government in the Budapest and general Hungarian situation is one of the greatest victories the free world ever accomplished. You know how it is. Sometimes you beat your opponent by being more able at the game than he is. And sometimes you let him beat himself by his errors. Well, this was one of the first times when the whole world got a free demonstration that the Russian system was not designed for the common people of Russia or its satellites. This was physical, visible proof that the Russian system was to beat down and murder anybody who disagreed with the government. It was this astounding demonstration for some people who wouldn't believe what they were told year in and year out. It was this demonstration of the use of force that shook the communists throughout the world. Even in France, even in Italy, where the communists were large in numbers, there were tremendous internal revolutions among the communists themselves. They couldn't face the truth. They couldn't continue to talk about communism as the hope of the future. They couldn't say anymore, workers of the world, unite. You have only your chains to lose, because they shot the workers who tried to break the chains. And what was most embarrassing of all, the workers of the world were uniting, but they were uniting against communism and not with it. Here in this country, we have some few people who are communists, who say they're communists, who put out the Daily Worker out of New York as their newspaper, and even they were sickened. They couldn't quite get this change in the line and keep their self-assurance. This was a major victory in the West against communism. By way of contrast, I can't call it a defeat, but by way of contrast, the role of the free nations in the Near East is a contrast indeed. The Near East actually is made up of two private little wars. One is around the canal, and the other one is the fight between Israel and the Arab nations. For communist purposes, this problem has been made one. They don't want to distinguish between Nasser, which is a problem which you can analyze and come out with various answers, and the war between the Arab nations and Israel. Here we have followed almost a lack of policy. It is difficult to sit down and review the records and find out, is there any series of connected events which can be called a policy, an underlying guide. And here we find the free nations of the world embarrassed. You know, we objected when our friends, the French and the British, moved their forces in to take the canal. We won friends with the Arabs. That was wonderful for the moment. And then we turned around and said, well, France should give freedom, possibly, to the Algerians, who are also Arabs. And then we lost the friendship of our allies again. And then we changed our policy and said, well, maybe this colonial problem can be deferred. Well, then we lost the Arabs again. So it's off again, on again, Finnegan. The victory we had obtained in the Hungarian situation, we are rapidly losing in the Near East. Now, all of this, you say, is very interesting, but what basic policies, what guides are there? Well, I suggest that as Americans, we could make a couple of suggestions that ought to strike home. You know, we are one of the great nations of the world that started our existence with a rebellion. We rebelled against being a colonial property of a European nation. Well, how much more logical then would it be for our policy before the whole world to say, we oppose colonialism. We oppose colonialism when it consists of the nations of Eastern Europe, right behind the Iron Curtain, colonies maintained by Russia. We oppose colonialism when it's the British on the island of Cyprus. And we oppose colonialism when it's the French in Algeria. We oppose colonialism, friend or foe. That's the position. And why do we oppose it? Because we believe in democracy. We believe in the right of people to determine by themselves what kind of government they want and in what country it's going to rule. This is our position. This is an American position. And if we could be consistent on the one question of colonialism, we might be very much farther ahead in the Near East than we are today. Secondly, we have been quite adamant about the British and the French getting out of the canal area. Why can't we be equally strong in getting the Arabs to stay out of Israel? When we get nothing but insults from Nasser, we think of new ways for him to insult us. I don't know. And I would say that statement, I don't know, is the only policy which I've seen to be working in the Near East. There are some great thinkers in this country who say, well, you know, by not having a policy, you confuse them. I got news for them. I'm confused too. Now, the new doctrine we adopted with some difficulties, the Eisenhower doctrine. I don't want to use the word Eisenhower to apply critical or political connotations, but that's what it's called. The Eisenhower doctrine was evolved after much hemming and hawing. I understand that the doctrine didn't need to be approved by Congress because the Constitution gives the President the right he asked for when he wanted that doctrine approved. But nevertheless, he asked for authority, which he could do, and he's got it. Well, what is it? The doctrine says two things. One, we will oppose with military force any incursions by Russia in this area. I suggest we've been doing that for years. We have said for years, if the Russians move in to any more countries, we're going to take them on. We're going to take them on alone, as we do in Korea, or we'll take them on along with UN nations. There's no news there. We said we will supply military aid to the countries who want it in the Near East. We've been doing that. So nothing new there. But what we did not say was, let's separate these fighting cats, the people in Israel and the Arabs, and get them both back into their respective countries, and then say the land which they left is going to nobody until these two parties sign a peace agreement, a peace treaty. They were supposed to sign a peace treaty in 1949. It was never done. So, by holding the lands which were vacated, we might induce the dear brothers to do a little collective bargaining. Next, on the canal area, one proposal was that, well, good. The canal is owned by a private company. It is in the land of Nasser. Nasser's government is sovereign and supreme. The government of Nasser may buy that canal and pay the private owners for it. Just as the government comes along and cuts off a slice of my property and gives me the money and says, we're gonna buy your land. So why? So we're gonna put a road through here. So I don't want a road. That's too bad. We're gonna condemn it. Here's the money, and that's it. That policy in this country could have been applied, indeed was, by Nasser in Egypt. But when the war was stopped over there, and we got the canal cleaned out, we thought that canal was for the use of anybody who was willing to pay to go through the canal. That was one of their features that brought the French and the British in with military forces. We were told if you put the British and the French back in their own countries, we'll open the canal and everybody who use it will pay the price. Now we hear maybe everybody can use the canal, and we are sure one thing: Israel won't be allowed to use the canal because they said we are in a state of war with Israel. Well, I wouldn't want to pass any private comments, but what the Israelis did to the Arabs in that war, I don't know that it was a war. There was a state of war. I think the Arabs was still running. But there we are. The canal, which we thought we had opened, the war, which we thought we'd stopped, it isn't stopped. The canal isn't open. It isn't available to everybody who's willing to pay, including the Israeli. And now, around the other side, in the Gulf of Aqaba, which is another avenue by which the people of Israel may send their ships into the broad seas, that is in danger of being blocked again. I can't complicate or confuse you anymore. I think I'd better stop. I stop by saying the victory we had in Hungary is being quietly toned down. Every effort is being made to play down that aspect. And the troubles we have in the Near East are being magnified by every propaganda technique. Because the basic truth is that whether it was the canal, or whether it was Nasser, or whether it's Israel, the real people that we face are not Nasser's people, not Arabs, not the Israelis, not the British or the French, but the Russians. And they have Russian material, Russian guns, Russian equipment in there to the hilt. They took them where? From the people in Czechoslovakia. Now, it's at this point that sometimes you get exasperated and say, why don't we move in there, kick Nasser in the pants, open the canal up, and say, okay, let's go back home and have a little peace. The answer to that question is, you can kick Nasser in the pants, but the guy in the pants won't be Nasser, it's going to be Russia. And when the time comes, we want to take on the Russians, I think there are a few questions left unanswered. I don't know that anybody can any longer afford a war. If it's got to come, I guess we've got to go. Which it happens to be the limit of most people's interest in international affairs. Greetings, dear sir and brother. Thank you for listening.